Okay, welcome Senate Government Operations, Friday, March 19th. And we have today what we're going to do. But first of all, I want to say, Neville, the accent was a cross between Hathaway and Dr. Blake, which is filmed in New Zealand. Okay, just wanted you to know that I had.
Yeah, because I looked it up. He was Yorkshire. I thought, I don't think I'm Yorkshire.
So sorry about that, everybody. So what we're doing today is, and first I will apologize. I have to leave at 1:30 for a meeting with the pro tem for a few minutes, and I will get filled in by everybody, but I have seen this presentation before. But I just want to tell everybody what we're, why we're doing this. We have and the people who are here to talk to us will let us know more, but we have a completely outdated employee classification system. As with many things in the state, we've been, it has become like the house that Jack built. You know, you add something here and then you add something here and then you do. And so HR has been working on a new classification system and trying to figure out where we need to go for some time. And what this, and the reason we asked Pat Gable to be here with us is because you use the same classification system. And I didn't know if you'd had a chance to see this or not, and the VSEA also, because there might be questions about where we're going and how we're going and who's involved and everything. And I just wanted us to start this conversation and to, so that as we move forward, people are informed about where we're going and why we're going there. So this is really a presentation and then just a kind of a general discussion about what it means and where we're going, and opportunity for you to ask questions. So does that make sense to, yes, Senator Polina?
Well, I'm just curious, are we really going somewhere, or we just, in other words, do we expect change to happen soon? Not soon, but out of this conversation?
Well, they will, when they do the presentation, there also is a timeline involved in it. And there may be legislative changes that need to be made, or there may not. But as the committee that is responsible for state employees, I think we need to be kept aware of where we're going and why we're going there.
Sure.
But yes, we hopefully are going somewhere.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions? So with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Commissioner Vsta, and with apologies for dropping off at 1:30, and then I'll come back. Okay, so Beth, if you want to take over and do your presentation. And
great.
And I don't know if you want to have questions asked as you're presenting, or if you'd rather wait, because I know that you're going to present, and then I assume that you're going to have Neville present the information that he's been working on. So
Yes,
that's
yes.
up to you. It's your show.
Okay. Well, thank you, Senator White. So there is there's 2 PowerPoints in the that you should have received, as well as in the committee page online. So do you prefer that you guys can all look at those on another device, right? Or do you prefer me to share that on the screen?
I prefer not sharing.
Okay.
That's just me.
Okay.
Okay. So of the 2 presentations, there's one that is titled Class Comp to Ledge PowerPoint. Right. I think that's the one that you all have. And it starts out, the first page is classification, modernizing a 40-year-old system. So that's page 1. And then moving to page 2 right now, that it's really why do we need the classification and compensation system now? And Senator White did really set you up for that. It's 40 years old. The system we have now, it's called the Willis system. It's outdated. It's unsupported by the vendor. The vendor created this system off of a more widely used system. I don't, maybe even more than 40 years ago. It was a one person shop, and he has since passed a long time ago. So there's no support. So when new technology comes in place, new types of positions come in place, we're just really, looking at jobs and trying to evaluate jobs without the modern tools that other government entities have the benefit of. In general, nobody likes the system. It's been confirmed by stakeholder meetings. We've met with, we had our consultant here, Neville Kenning of Kenning Consultant, has been working with us really since July 2019. He did the work in the first July 2019 to December in 2019. We were getting ready to present this information last year at this time, but then the world kind of changed, and we're here now presenting this to you and looking to move forward from here on out. So we met with the VSEA, we met with Ledge Council, we met with the joint representatives of the Joint Fiscal Office and representatives of DHR and the Agency of Administration, just kind of digging at what the issues were. And legislature in particular, as well as finance and management, it's definitely unpredictable from a budgetary perspective. And those who have been looking at the budget for years and years and years have kind of seen that. Whereas, kind of the Pay Act process is pretty predictable. The state's going in with that budget, what you're approving. And that's how we generally approve employee raises and increases for that. Everyone's not always happy with the decisions. They're seemingly subjective on classification. And we have over 1,800 job classes to manage, which is just way too many. If you move on to the next slide, our project goals for the next phase of the project. Oh, actually, this was our goal for this. This was an overall goal. So we wanted to seek the expertise of a consultant in the classification and compensation field in state government and public sector to provide the state with options for implementing a modern approach to classification and job evaluation. So part of that contract that we have Mr. Kenning for was to set out a path for a transition and implementation to a preferred option, including a cost benefit analysis, what kind of staff DHR would need, supplemental staff to do the implementation, what we would need to make a successful project, barriers, changes in legislation and collective bargaining agreements, if any, and then what type of education and training would be required. So that's what we asked Mr. Kenning to look at. And to date, as I mentioned, we hired Kenning Consulting in July 2019. He reviewed and made recommendations on a current system based on interviews with the stakeholders, analysis of our policies, collective bargaining agreements, and changes that might be needed in collective bargaining agreements to move forward. He did an expert analysis and documentation and looked at our current system. We asked him to provide 3 classification new system options and a cost estimate. And the report that he completed really included all those things. We talk about compensation philosophy, job classification and documentation, job evaluation, grade structure, salary structure, which we're finding out is not really the same thing. But we think it's the same thing because we have our classification and compensation. We're kind of doing them together when that's not a very modern way, or maybe it was never really intended to do that even in the old system. How we administer pay movement, how we administer plan administration, and project change in management. So that's kind of where we are. The next page is a picture of all the components that a classification system would have. And on top of that, you have an overall compensation philosophy. So what is the state's philosophy on compensating employees? We have a little bit in statute on what our classification system should be, and that it should provide, I don't even remember what it is, but we have a little bit of that. We don't actually have a compensation philosophy. It's kind of based on the administration, who is in the administration at the time frame. I think the experience from the HR department, and our what we need to do to attract employees. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but there's not an overarching philosophy that everybody has agreed to. And then on the bottom is how we administer the plan. And in between, there's 4 components. We've got the job evaluation and classification components, pricing and pay delivery, and they're all now in one box. And the recommendation we have is we got to take those out of the boxes and be putting each component in the right boxes. And I think that when you have questions about that, those are really things that Mr. Kenning can talk about more eloquently, certainly, than I can. And finally, we created about where to get started. We actually used to have dates and projected dates out on when we expected to have that done by, but because of a year delay, we just do it by month. So we want to, the place to start is the compensation philosophy, and then actually looking at all of our classifications now and grouping them into work groups and putting them into categories that gets rid of our 1,800 classifications down to a much more manageable level. So that's kind of the first stage of what we're expecting to do in the next 12 months. And we've put money in our fiscal year 2022 budget to help us with the work on that, including going out to bid on what a new classification system would be. So all that work is kind of starting in fiscal year 22, and that's the money that we included in our budget there. So if you go to the last line, we kind of looked at the next steps and where we are. And this is, we think it may cost to implement a new system in the range of probably up to $1 million once we do all the work. But again, we still have a little bit ways to get started and to know, we don't even know what system we want yet. And that's kind of one of the first steps before we move into the rest of it. And when you're looking at all the various components that we think of classification, because we have it so closely tied with our pay structure, all of those things are very much tied together. And if we want to break that apart and go for a new modern approach, there's a lot of partners that need to be involved, including the legislature, and very important, our labor partners in that, because the way year over year, and we've bargained that to a way that there's really no flexibility in the process. The process is what it is. And if we want to do something different, we need to all think about that together and how to best move forward as a state. So I think I have one more slide. Okay, next steps, which I already talked about, which is really creating a compensation philosophy to get to the foundation of what we want to do, defining what we pay for and why, and then just in general terms of to provide kind of a lasting basis for where we're looking forward in the future. So that's my part of it. I don't know if I want to stop and pause for questions now from the committee or VSEA folks, or.
Let's
Hi,
take a
Senator.
couple of questions if people have
Yeah.
them, and then we can take more questions as we go along. Senator Collins has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So Beth, if I'm reading the timeline correctly, it looks like this is going to take a little bit more than 3 years. That seems like a long time, but maybe it isn't. And
Well,
maybe Neville can answer that more than.
I think he can answer the board about, but from my perspective, it's the mechanics of it are not as difficult as the actual implementation and where we want to go. So if in the end, we want to bargain something and we want to do different pay structures, pretty much now we have one pay chart for everybody in state government. That really isn't working very well for all. You look at some of the jobs that we have, and it takes 20 to 25 years to get to top pay in that job, where you may be fully capable and have learned everything you need to know and are an expert in a much shorter period of time. How does that incentivize newer employees to stay? Oh, well, if I stay here 15 more years, then maybe I can do that. And, we have, you look at our ability to retain people in the field of corrections and corrections officers, and how difficult it is for that. I mean, one thing is the pay equity, how does the pay compare to what's happening, in similar jobs across the state or across the country. But another is, what's the disparity in pay between a newer correctional officer and somebody that has longevity. So, those are the types of things that are going to take longer. I just can't say this is what it's going to be. And the union's going to be like, oh, okay, whatever she says is fine. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. So there's a lot of work to get to the end point. And so that's why I think a lot of time is built in there. If it was I think we could do it faster if it was just the Department of Human Resources deciding what it's going to be and how we're going to change, but that's not really the best way to implement change that that everybody is comfortable with.
Okay.
So,
And as you were responding, and point taken, I didn't necessarily mean to imply it was a bad thing, because now I'm remembering how this legislative body works, and in many cases, it's anything but quick. I'll let it go there.
and
Senator, you asked me for my comment on it. So these, for the size of state, are based on my experience, and I've worked with about 25 states on these sort of projects. The shortest I've ever been required to do it in was 180 days, because that's the legislation that funded the project said, but I don't want to do those in 180 days again. Typically, they take about 18 months to 2 years. The reason why we have added time here is because of, and I'll reinforce what Beth said, the parts that are required to be bargained, negotiated, etc. So the technical parts of it can probably be done in about 18 to 24 months. We just don't know. We recognize things need to be bargained. We just don't know how long that takes. So from a technical timeline perspective, 18 months to 2 years.
Thank you, Mr. King. I appreciate it.
Senator Clarkson?
Thank you. I have some pretty elemental questions.
That's
So
good.
I just don't understand this. So we have, I think, Beth, you just said we have one pay scale, but we have 1,800 job classes. Okay, so what is a job class? Is it a job? Is a job class just another name for 1,800 different types of jobs?
I'm going to let Neville answer that one for you.
Okay.
Can I just,
so-
before we move on, can I just ask, do you have a presentation that includes the answers to these things? I mean, rather than jumping around, I'm just wondering if you have something planned that will explain some of this for us. Maybe we should go along with your plan.
No. If you go back, the answer is no.
Okay.
But so I'll answer the question, but if you go back in the document that Beth just presented, the page that says components of a modern classification and compensation plan.
Yeah.
It's affectionately known as the Neville burger.
Oh,
you got the bun on the bottom.
It looks delicious.
Okay. So in the private, and if you've been in the private sector, this term classification won't mean anything, because in the private sector, they talk about jobs. So when we say we've got 1,800 classifications, I'll give an example. An accountant 2 is a classification, and you might have 15 people assigned to that who are doing similar work. So instead of having 15 accountant 2s, we have a classification called accountant 2. There's a slight variation on what they do. So in terms of individual jobs, you have over 7,000, because that's how many employees are covered by the scope of this. But jobs that are similar are grouped together. A correctional officer, you might have 300 of those. They're doing similar work, maybe not identical work, and that's called a classification. Now you have the reason you got it, and you have one pay scale. Now that's a challenge, because the state is a very diverse employer. And let me explain that. What you have in a state is you have jobs which, if they're in the private sector, would have nothing to do with each other.
Right.
You have a livestock inspector, a nurse, a correctional officer, a transportation worker, a chemist. Well, in the private sector, they'd be employed in different industries, but in a state. And the market for some of those jobs is very different. And yet we try and fit that all within one pay structure. It's a very 1980s thing. Most states that I work with have 4, 5, 6 different pay structures to recognize the fact that the market is different for different types of jobs. They'll have a law enforcement pay structure. They'll have a nursing pay structure because there's a demand for nursing. They may have an IT structure. They'll have a medical pay structure. They'll have a general pay structure. You know, they're the sort of examples of different pay structures. And it recognizes that the market is not the same for all jobs.
Got it.
You
So
follow?
yeah, so long term, this process would enable you to say, okay, all the lawyers working in state government could have a pay scale that was actually competitive.
Correct. That's exactly it.
Or
Yes.
all scientists, or all mechanics, or all, okay. So we
Yeah.
might end up with 1,800 different pay scales.
That's not the goal.
No, you won't. But you may end up with, like, New Mexico's a good example. They've gone to occupational-based pay structures, and they've identified 13 different occupations. And so that's what it. Yeah, I doubt if you'll end up with that many because of the number of employees you have. But it reflects the fact that the market's not the same for everyone. And that also, particularly over the last few years, the market has not moved the same for everyone. If you go back to the downturn of 08, 9, 10, where trades jobs in some states, the market fell 20 to 40% because construction stopped. But nursing kept chugging along at 3 or 4%.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
this pandemic is a classic example of the
Yes.
disparity. I mean,
Yes, exactly. So on the Neville burger, if I can continue on that, because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
really, it's the core foundation of what's going to be different. My brief was in the northeast box, which is called job evaluation. Look into the Willis system and tell us what the issues are. 2 months into the project, I said to the DHR leadership team, if we just solve one box called the job evaluation box, which is my brief, you got 1985 system for the other components, and you'll have a 2022-23 for one component. And the reason you've ended up with 1,800 classifications is that that's the way people get money. I'll reclassify you. Now, so the accountant 2 comes in and says, I think I'm doing something different. And so we call them an accountant 3. But they shouldn't have, they're doing something different, but our classifications are so specific that they get reclassified because that's the way we can get the money. Well, that's 2 ways. It just does 2 things. One is it messes up your classification, which should be about work, not about pay. Pricing is about pay. And secondly, that's how you end up with 1,800.
Got it.
I mean, you got what, like, I'll give you some examples from other states. North Carolina, that I redesigned their plan, 63,000 employees, has about 1,200 classifications. Missouri, covering about 26.
How many pay scales do they have?
5 or 6. Missouri, about 27,000 employees, now has just slightly under 500 classifications. So Mississippi, just working with them at the moment, 2,200 classifications currently. We're going to end up at about 700. Now, I only give those examples because I want to stress that while I've worked with a lot of states, the last thing I do is cut and paste from another state. You've got to customize it to your particular environment. But your classification plan has become your de facto compensation plan. I'll call you something else to get you some money. No, that should be in the pricing and pay delivery box. It's ridiculous, if I can use that term without offending, that it takes 25 years to get to the top of a pay scale. That assumes you're still doing something differently for 25 years. That makes no sense at all. It makes no sense that I've got to stick it. And Beth gave the example of corrections. I've done a number of studies with correction officers, and if you keep them for 5 to 7 years, you will keep them.
It will be a miracle.
So why do they have to wait? So what we did in Utah, for example, is we front loaded their pay movements. They got good, like 5% for the first 3 years, 3% for the next 3 years, 2% for the next 2 years. And then, so, it was general movement, but we front loaded it because we knew if we covered the first 7 years, they would stay.
So I feel like you're telling me in part that we've been shortchanging workers by using the system. But-
No.
Okay,
That's
talk about that.
And I can actually talk about, so some of the things we've been doing to address the situation we have. We have one pay chart, but we have ways to get around that. So we use market factor analysis. So nurses, they're in their pay chart, but they might get a certain percentage more because they're nurses and we can't pay them. Corrections officers have something called accelerated steps, but so we have all these workarounds. But we have workarounds because we do have to address the market, but it seems like it really is time for us to look at it from a big picture and from the start. Maybe there's some things that we are doing right. And I think that's what we get to at the end, but we kind of want to start and build a new foundation and then move forward. So so what the number of pay charts and pay scales we end up with, who knows? It's just, and the way our pay charts work also is they are front loaded. You get faster movement in the first couple of years, but for some jobs, maybe we need faster movement, or maybe we just maybe the range shouldn't be so big, right? Maybe our ranges should be a lot more compressed. And you start higher or you start lower. Maybe the top pay shouldn't go up that high. Maybe it's more of a commodity. I don't know, so I think it's time to look at it fresh. I would say overall, one of the things that we do have is we do have pretty good retention. And I think that we've been able to, looking at it from my perspective, what I hear from other states, we don't have some of the issues that I've seen in other states because of the way, the process for pay raises works here and the way it's legislated. So we bargain changes in pay, and with the administration's criteria is going in, we're looking at economic factors and what we can afford, and union leadership, of course, and bargaining teams are always looking out for employees and how they can how they can maximize the benefit for employees. And then we have a process where we go through the legislature, we go through Pay Act, the legislature approves it, but it's not really it's reliant on the state budget, but it's not really dependent on who's in charge of the legislature at that time. So you see some states where employees haven't gotten raises in 10 years. And so that just messes up everything. We're like, every time I see those things and hear them at a national thing, I'm like, oh, I'm glad we're not in that position. You know what I mean? And, you look at, we have a lot of data in our workforce report that, kind of compares our pay. So I think we're doing okay. I don't think we're doing this because we have a pay crisis. Right. The impetus is really fix this outdated job evaluation tool. And we could do that. But the things that people actually complain about the system, that's only one piece. It's not going to address the things that the legislature doesn't like about the system. Like, how come you asked for Pay Act for this amount of money, but now coming in, you need a budget adjustment because reclassifications gave you this much extra money? Like, that's something that the legislature really doesn't appreciate because it doesn't help with their careful planning of what they're going to do for the budget. What we heard,
Senator, I think that Beth just touched on the key to why we need to do something. And if I can use a vehicle analogy, you got a 1985 vehicle where the designer is deceased and there are no mechanics.
We have a few of those in Vermont.
Yeah, what's so bad about that?
Yeah.
So no, I don't think we can say that I have no basis in knowing whether the employees have been shortchanged or not. They have had salary increases. What we don't know, but I come back to the burger again. you put everything into the same box rather than looking at what each box is supposed to determine. I mean, why should tenure just be the only reason for getting a pay increase?
It should.
Yeah, and so that's what you got at the moment. So,
So, excuse me, Senator Rob has a question.
Thanks. I mean, as I listen to all this, I'm just I'm reminded once upon a time, I think Judy Rosenstrike told me this, who used to serve in the House, that the laundry workers at the state hospital were like the lowest pay band, and they would work extremely hard and, probably deal with a lot of long-term health effects. And they were constantly in a basement somewhere, doing the laundry of like the entire state. And she worked really hard to increase their pay band back when that was the system. And so I'm just thinking about a lot of other factors that go into, besides just their market attractiveness around the country. How much do they have to travel across the state? How much turnover is there? How much, mental or physical fatigue is there in the job? I just have heard a lot about lawyers and, people like that. No offense to any lawyers, but I think there's a lot of people who work extremely hard, and we always hear, oh, well, we can't find people to fill these really critical jobs where they're in a lower pay band just because they're not professionalized. So I just would love to hear more.
Yeah, I can talk to that. And I'll give you an example from the state of Kansas, where we developed multiple pay plans, not by occupation, but by level of work. And what I mean by that is they had a system where whether you were whatever you want to call the lowest level of work and the highest level of work, their pay structures all looked the same. And so we developed, one of the plans we developed was what we called a vocational pay plan. And if in the current system, if say the market was $12 an hour, and whenever I use numbers, they're illustrative, okay? Well, because they had wide ranges, the entry was like $6 an hour, and the maximum was like $18 an hour. And I said, that's crazy. That's highly technical consultant talk, okay? And I said, that's crazy, because if the market is $12 an hour, why do you think you're going to attract someone for $6 an hour? And why would you pay $18 an hour? And so what we did was in that particular case, we said, okay, if the market's $12 an hour, the least we're going to pay, the minimum of the range will be $11 an hour. The maximum we're going to pay is, illustrative again, $14 an hour. And you go, but the laundry worker wants to earn more money. And now I'm going to switch my example, which I've used for years, is from the subway, from a Subway sandwich shop. Okay, so when you go into a Subway sandwich shop, who's the first person that you see? It's the person who asks you, what bread do you want? Well, we're not going to say that's a going rate of $12 an hour. We're not going to pay $18 an hour by sticking around for 25 years as a bread asker. What we say to that person is, if you want to earn more, move down the line, be the filler, be the cashier, etc. Now, for those who only ever want to be bread askers, there'll be a finite rate. Okay, but we encourage people to progress still in their vocational field. You follow me? So that's one of the other reasons why one size doesn't fit all anymore. We also take into consideration the physical aspects of a job, which is hazard, etc., and deter potential hazardous environment. That's what's called job context. Most job evaluation systems measure job content. What do you need to know? But we also need to take into consideration job context, such as the physical environment, the mental environment, the hazardous environment, etc. We can measure those things.
When you said that, it helped. And it also made me think about all the opportunities for bias that are built into who goes from the bread asker to the cashier, and who, like, does someone jump the line and they're going straight to cashier for some reason, and maybe everyone should start as a bread asker in that band, so that you're not saying this person looks like management material who just comes in when somebody's passed over, who's really.
Well, that's outside the scope of this in terms of that's not a classification of compensation issue. That's a recruitment selection process issue, which
bias issue as well.
Which I've not delved into. Yeah. State governments in general, because that then leads to issues of pay equity. State governments in general, and this is a 30,000-foot statement. Okay. But state governments in general have done a pretty good job on pay equity. As I said, that's a 30,000-foot statement.
Do we?
This is Harold.
Sorry.
Sure. I just want to make a quick point.
Well, who are you?
I'm Harold Schwartz, Director of Operations.
I just can't see everybody on my iPad all at once. So sure, Howard.
I'm Harold Schwartz, Director of Operations in Department of Human Resources. I know a couple times people have mentioned lawyers. We might be able to do lawyers when we do this project, but they are not classified employees. They're called exempt employees. And generally, we're talking about classified employees. The other clarification is state police do have their own separate pay chart from the other classified employees. Just to clarify, as do the judiciary people in a collective bargaining agreement.
Senator Rahm, you want to follow up? And then Senator Clarkson has her hand up too, but go ahead, Senator Rahm.
This might be a Beth question, but do we get an annual pay equity report? Did I miss that this year?
So if in the workforce report, we have a lot of information on pay equity in our workforce report, and I can put that, or I think I might be able to put the link to that in your chart, but I think, so the workforce report is something that I know this committee really uses a lot, and we do have a lot of information. So a lot of it is more gender pay equity, but they're all issues of racial pay equities kind of in there. So you can see where we are. We also do as the state, we have our EEO plan overall statewide, and we also have a governor's workforce equity and diversity report that we submit every year. And so that report is was completed, I think, January 30th, and I can send you that as well. And I can just send the committee links to all those things.
Thank you.
I think we lost Alice.
Yeah, Senator Clarkson had to leave to go to another meeting for a couple of minutes. So hopefully Senator White will be back soon. I have a totally different kind of question, just to move away from what we've been talking about, which has been interesting. But when we talk about the $1 million cost potentially, I'm just wondering how much of that is hardware as opposed to working with people. I mean, because we have these problems with IT around in this state. I'm just wondering, are we going to be able to work this out?
This is not really an IT project at all.
Okay.
I would say there's an IT component depending on which quote system we pick, but our system that we use now is really more of a manual. It's like a user's manual on how to do the things that Neville was talking about. Okay, what is the job content? What's the physical environment? What's the mental environment? And it's more of a tool that we use. This would be a modern tool that's supported, and when there's new ideas or new things that come in the workforce, we would use whatever that tool was. And the tool may be an online tool, or it may come with a lot of stuff about pay markets and stuff like that. So there might be more stuff in it, and it could be, rather than having it be more like a user's manual that's paper, it might be something that's online that we actually buy, and there could be something that we're paying an annual fee for. But it's not like implementing a new human resources information system or a new payroll system or anything like that. The technology part will will be the easiest part of it, or whatever that is. The change
Senator, I can tell you the vast majority of there's two parts. One is the vast majority of cost is consulting cost. But if you look on the next steps page of what Beth presented, the big variance was on the one for the new work measurement methodology and process 145 ranging to 565. What I was asked to do as part of my brief was to go out and shop for who can provide a modern version to what's currently known as Willis. And they were the range of quotes from 3 different vendors. Now, I know those vendors, and I can tell you there's a technology component, but it's from a record keeping perspective. It's not an IT system. It's using technology to support the system, it's not a major IT implementation. Does that help?
Sure. I mean, I know we have to do that kind of stuff. Just that we have sort of a spotty track record when it comes to that around here. I wonder whether anybody else wants to make comments at this point. People haven't spoken yet.
This is Pat Gable, the state court administrator. I just have what's probably a very elementary question. But in this approach to compensation, are you thinking just salary, or are you thinking the salary plus benefits component? And if it's salary plus benefits component, how do you figure into that, the kinds of changes, for example, that are being anticipated in our pension system?
I can answer that. I can answer that question when it comes. Or do you want to answer it, Beth?
Well, it's kind of a big picture question. I mean, right here, obviously total compensation is always a factor when employees are, deciding what they want to do and where they want to work. So that's always a factor. We are particularly talking about a pay system, but anytime just like when you're bargaining or we're bargaining, I mean, all of those components come into it. And so the other types of things, we'll keep those kind of separate for now, from my perspective. They certainly, when we're talking about pay, and not any big secret when the management's always going to bring up, well, we get all these other benefits, we don't have to pay as much, and the union's like, yes, but we want this other thing too. I mean, that's kind of how it goes all the time, but I mean, so in bargaining, all the total compensation packages are already going to be included, but this project is really more about getting a modern everything. I mean, I want to modernize all of the benefits we provide. I think we want, we're having other conversations about the pension system, and what pension system is going to be going forward, if there's going to be changes. And this is somewhat, I would say, the same conversation about what, but it's not real. I shouldn't be making this parallel, but it's about modernizing how we measure what people do, how we make sure that people are paid equitably and appropriately in the modern world. And just to let you know, one of the folks that Neville talked to when he was having the conversations with the VSEA was a judiciary employee as well. So.
Yes, so obviously the VSEA represents an important component of the judiciary workforce, but we have a substantial portion of our workforce not represented by the VSEA. And so this is our introduction to this idea. And so I would just say that having a different job in the judiciary, I had to learn the Willis system and keep trying to apply it. And I'm a lawyer of long standing, and I had a heck of a time trying to understand the Willis system and apply it. So I'm definitely with people who think it's time to be modernized and have it be less idiosyncratic. It almost seems like some kind of weird cult religion as opposed to system.
Just to add to what Beth said, in most of these redesign projects that I've done, it does focus on developing new salary structures, but most states ask that and this comes back to the compensation philosophy component. When we say compensation, what do we mean? So they will assess the competitiveness of their benefits to determine what their pay structure should be, but it's typically not a redesign of benefits as well. But because there's a myth that often exists, and it's quote, well, we're so competitive on benefits, we don't need to be competitive on salary. And if we had time and I had a whiteboard, I could prove to you if you're not competitive on salary, by definition, you can't be competitive on benefits because a number of benefits are expressed as a percentage of salary.
So
Yes, that's true.
There, will you or will you not be looking at benefits then?
That's yet to be determined.
Okay.
But as I said, what typically in terms of scoping out the box that says a salary structure, I would recommend that we determine the competitiveness of benefits, but we typically don't get into a redesign of the benefits. We want to know how competitive they are because that can have an impact on the salary structure.
Pat, are you okay, Pat? You have any follow-up?
Yes, no, I understand that because I think I'm interested, obviously, a salary structure, you want it to be fair, not just fair in substance, but also procedurally fair, meaning
Yes.
it's perceived to be fair. And so that's very important. And the other thing that I focus on in particular is the challenge of recruitment and, hoping that a new look at state compensation generally would keep in mind how important it is to recruit people who can provide government services in a changing environment, particularly related to technology.
Are state governments one of the more stable employers these days?
Certainly are right
Here's-
now
Right.
in Vermont.
Here's what typically occurs, Senator. When you have an economic challenge like 08, 09, 10, and then what's occurred in the last year or so. I'll talk 08, 09, 010. Typically what occurs is the private sector turns down first, which reduces revenue for the public sector. So they turned out, any impact turns down second. The private sector comes out first, the public sector comes out second.
Sure.
There have been layoffs, and I'll jump to the last year. There have been layoffs in the public sector. The unfortunate thing was COVID hit just as revenues in state governments were looking really good. Salary increases were looking good, budgets were looking good. So the outcome from this, I can't predict, but the days of saying a public sector employee for life have gone. That's not the case in terms of by that I meant from a surety of employment perspective.
Well, that's true across the economy, though. It used to be people had a job and they kept the job for 20, 30 years. Now
Yeah.
people change jobs so frequently.
Well, if now it's 9 jobs by 40,
9 jobs by 40.
that's the average. That was
Wow.
pre-COVID, but it was 9 jobs by 40.
Did you put your hand up, Ms. Pope? Okay,
I'm
sorry.
fine.
Okay. I just want to talk a little bit about how closely the VSA will be involved in this process as well. I know you're going to deal with a lot of stakeholders, but can you talk a little bit about the role of the VSA from your point of view in this process?
From my perspective, I think that one of the things that we've done is we've kind of mapped out all the various components of if we were to change this section, does a policy need to change? Does a law need to change? Or does a collective bargaining agreement need to change? So we've actually mapped out, that was part of the project that we had Mr. Kenning do. We have like spreadsheets of whether, of these various components and what's kind of governing them. So the VSEA is going to need to be involved every step of the way. And there's certain things that we could do, I would say, if we wanted to, without I would say cooperation or without bargaining. There would be certain components that we could do, but because our collective bargaining agreements are so tied in with our classification process, that would be really difficult to do anything without VSCA input and I think that we are expecting, and we brought them in early in the process to find out, what. We know that people don't like the system that we have, but in particular, what various constituencies don't like about it. So yeah, we will definitely need to have our union partners included and involved, because especially if we want to move forward with addressing pay issues that we have.
Sure.
Senator, typically when you do a project like this, you form a project steering committee, and I encourage that all the key stakeholders be on that project steering committee. And then that, from my recommendation, would include the VSCA. You can't do it in isolation from them.
Is there such a steering committee yet, or has that not happened yet?
It'd be down the road, once we get the project commenced. It'll be one of the first steps.
Any other comments or questions from the committee members? Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and I do want to hear from Tom. But Neville, I'm curious, we're talking about state government. Have you done work for the private sector as well? A huge corporation that also has to structure the way that they pay their own employees, or are you pretty much a government expert?
No, I prior to forming my own business 8 years ago, I worked for the Hay Group, which was a major player in this field, and worked in both the public and the private. So I've worked in both the public and private sector. My fields of expertise in the private sector was the utility industry, the food industry, the airline industry, the oil and gas industry. So I've worked across multiple sectors.
And you mentioned some of the other states that you either are currently working with or have. Have any of the New England states obtained your services?
Yes. And you cut out briefly, but I think your question was New England states. So I worked with New Hampshire in the late 90s. I worked with Maine a couple of years ago. So there's two examples.
Thank you.
Just curious, where do you work out of?
Where's my home office?
Yeah, just curious.
Palm Springs, California, where it's 88 degrees today.
I was going to say doesn't sound bad from this point. Well, it's going to push. We're going to push it into the 40s tomorrow. So,
yeah.
Tom, did you want to add anything to this conversation at this point, Tom? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. For the record, Tom Abdelnour, Vermont State Employees Association. I guess I would say that as Commissioner Fastigi alluded to a moment ago, the VSCA is eager to be a part of these discussions on an ongoing basis. We viewed this meeting today as mostly informational in nature. Several of my colleagues who are experts in classification, both in the Willis system and in classification more generally speaking, are watching via YouTube today, as are some of our member leaders who have expertise in this field. And I have no doubt that our members will very much look to be actively engaged in the process as it continues. As the commissioner said a few moments ago, certainly there are structural and procedural reasons that the VSCA needs to be involved as we go forward. But beyond that, picking up on a comment that Court Administrator Gable made a couple of moments ago, as I'm sure all of the members of the committee appreciate, there is an aspect of wanting to ensure procedural fairness going forward and a perception of propriety and of engagement. And we will stand ready as the conversation continues to engage in that process and make sure that any action that's taken, if an action is taken, is one that our members have had an opportunity to lend their considerable expertise to. So I appreciate the invitation to be here today, and we stand ready to continue this conversation moving forward.
Great. So I propose that we begin to wrap up this conversation, if that's okay with folks. We have another meeting that we have to, another conversation we have to be engaged in shortly. But I wonder, my question is sort of, what are the next steps after today? You don't need anything from us, I take it, but I'm just curious, what would you say your next steps are?
Our next steps are, we do need some funding to start moving forward, and we put $125,000 in our budget. Actually, it's a bump up of $109,000. I do not believe that money will be coming over in the budget that the House will be sending over. I guess my plea to the Senate is to put that funding back in so we won't get another year behind.
Did they choose to take it out, or was it never on the table?
Well,
in the House?
House Gov Ops really hasn't had a chance to even look at this issue yet. So I think it was House Appropriations wanted to have House Gov Ops weigh in, and they just, with all the other work they're doing with related to pensions, they just haven't had any time to focus on it.
Right.
I don't think they're necessarily opposed in general. I just think they just want more information and want input from House Gov Ops.
So do you have that somewhere in writing at all, or just, have you made a request at all?
It's in our budget.
Okay, it's in your budget. Okay.
It's in our budget. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And just to add that Beth, this group also met with Jane Kitchell and myself the other day. So Appropriations is aware of this request.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other comments or questions, I would say au revoir or something like that. Thanks a lot for coming in. I appreciate the fact that we're undertaking this work. It's really long overdue, as you well know and said very articulately. It's time we get behind this and make the changes that we need to make. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
So, Mr. Vice Chair, could we take a maybe 10-minute break?
I don't know. The slave driver's here.
Oh,
God.
because Allison isn't back yet either.
That's true. We have to wait for Allison. Well, the next group is coming in at 2:30. So yeah, we have time.
Yeah. Let's take a little break. Thanks.
Actually,
was that helpful?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Senator Polina did a perfect job.
I figured he would. All right. So let's take a break.
Okay. I just want to mention that before we went on break, I used a word to characterize the chair of our committee in a joking kind of way, but I think it may have been a rude way of putting it, and I didn't mean to in any way conjure up any painful images or emotions for people of color or anyone else. So I'll tell you what I said. I referred to you as a slave, not to you personally as a joke, but as a slave driver. And as soon as I said it, I felt like I wish I had sort of could put it back into my mouth again, because I knew as soon as the words came out that they were not an appropriate thing to joke around about. So I just want to apologize to anybody who may have felt taken aback by that. I really did not mean any harm or painful for anybody. I apologize.
Thank you. Okay, we are back. And what I'm going to do is, Gwen, if we can have you kind of set the stage for us here so we know what the issue is exactly. And can you do that for us? So first of all, actually, I apologize. Before you start, I think this is a group of faces that I'm not very familiar with. You aren't in our committee very often. So I'm going to ask that we introduce ourselves first so that you know who we are and where we're from. I'm Jeanette White. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm from Windham County.
Hi, I'm Anthony Pauline. I represent Washington County.
Senator Brian Collmore from Rutland County.
Senator Keisha Ram from Chittenden County.
And we will be joined by Senator Clarkson from Windsor County, who is currently presenting in another committee. So with that, Gwen, if you would like to set the stage for us here so we are aware of what the issue is.
Thank you, committee. Gwen Zaka, Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I think the other folks that are testifying can do kind of a better backup to what I'm about to say and give sort of the descriptives here. But essentially, when the whole consolidation of school districts started occurring, there was the issue of how to fill vacancies in between elections if there was a vacancy in a school board position, and who's the entity that makes that deciding factor. There was language, I believe it was in Act 11 from 2018 that was in play that had a sunset this summer. And if other folks that are testifying, correct me if I'm wrong, that temporarily allowed select boards to make that decision until the next election, to basically ensure that a local official from that community alone would be the representation for that town or city. But since then, that law is no longer in place. And so now it's no longer in the hands of the select board making that appointment. And I will now carry the baton to the next person to sort of say where the communities are right now, because I'm not exactly familiar with if there's any new concerns since then. But that law sunset, and now the school board, the school districts are making the appointments, and the school boards are making the appointments, not the select boards.
So can I just ask a clarifying question about that? Because it's a school district and it involves more than one community, the representative from the town of Putney to the school district board will be the Putney Select Board would have filled that vacancy up until this sunsetted. Now the school board itself, the district board, will make that appointment, and it may or may not be somebody from Putney. Is that?
As far as I understand it, yes.
Okay. All right, great. Any other questions for Gwen to clarify? Okay.
And this is just to say, this is one of those wonky things where it's, you know, your committee versus the education committee, and VLCT, we don't represent school districts. You know, we represent our members, but the select boards are really the only town entity, any governmental entity that really is the representative for a town, even though it's for a school district. So it doesn't really have a home, I guess you can say. I mean, it's a home now in GovOps, but it also impacts education. So
is the education committee addressing this at all that you know of?
As far as I know of, no.
Okay.
I know they took this up back in 2018 when they created that sunset
Okay.
provision.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know how we want to proceed here. Senator Collmore, I think you know most of the people who are testifying. So what I'm going to do is let you, I'll run the meeting, but I'll let you figure out what order to go in here because you know best the players. Is that okay?
Certainly it is, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Yeah. So from what I know about it, this whole thing was occasioned by someone that was on the school board resigning, and the ability or inability of the towns involved to appoint a new member. And that's how this came about. And I don't know whether Gwen's aware of any other municipalities that are in the same situation, but until someone comes off the board, it's not an issue because the school merger happened and we've gone along pretty well with the way things work. But this was occasioned because someone stepped down, and then there was some concern about who was the appointing party to replace that person on the school board. So I don't know. I know there are varying views of how we might go about doing that. Lynn Edmonds is the one that contacted me first. So Lynn, if you want to go ahead and just let us know what the situation is and how you have a view of how we could fix it. And you're muted.
Thank you.
You need to unmute, Lynn.
Yeah, you're muted, Lynn.
Okay,
There.
sorry. I don't do these very often. This is only my second one. The main reason I got involved in this was because I got a call from Robert Congdon from Clarendon because he knew that he's a friend of mine, and he knew that I had been involved in following our town plan recertifications back in 2017. And that's when I got kind of frustrated with how things work and how the general populace seemed to be powerless when we went to meetings and tried to get anything changed or done. So I had my perspective in this whole thing is from the general public that tries to understand some of this stuff can't because they're not able to understand the statute. It's kept at length. So I did a little write-up that I submitted earlier, and to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. I in a previous life, some more than 30 years ago now, I was an industrial engineering supervisor with UPS, and I used to do a lot of work measurement study and problem solving and such. So I just wrote down kind of in a report form of what I would do of an analysis based on my understanding of what is going on. And I know when I started into this, I didn't have all the understanding of what had happened with Act 32. And then Ken, for that, was good enough to put an article out. I spent a day trying to find out how that transpired, and I never realized probably I had the answer right here in town. I didn't realize it. So that was very helpful in understanding the lay of the land. And perhaps when that was changed, the school board at that point in time was being an elected body, had a similar authority as a select board would, but the rub comes in when you mix other towns in. So you've diluted the access from some of the people now because of this change. So at any rate, the thoughts that I jotted down and submitted, I hope people will take the time to read through them. And if you don't understand them, you feel free to call me or talk to me about it. This isn't something that I necessarily understand to be etched in stone, but these are my feelings from my perspective. And I think people are frustrated in general. If you go, and that's why we have so much divisiveness. It's things that it's really hard to navigate this stuff from the layman's point of view. And the only thing we have left really is that we have the authority to appoint people to represent us or to elect people to represent us. Everything else seems to be coming down from the top, not generating at our level and going up. So that's the frustration.
So Lynn, let me just interrupt if I could, because you still haven't really put the issue. The issue is there's no one from Clarendon on the school board. Isn't that the issue?
No. The issue is there are four representatives on the school board from Clarendon. Now there are only 3. And I think Todd spelled that out in his article in the Herald. But there's like 10 total board members, but only 3 when the school board goes to appoint. The town of Clarendon only has 3 votes in the appointment, as opposed to 7 from other towns, and that just doesn't seem right.
Okay, so we've got a merged school district that you feel Clarendon is underrepresented by having only 3 members. Would
Right.
that be a correct statement? Okay.
Well, they are in terms of authority, I guess in terms of the authority that to reappoint this vacancy, that's been taken away by virtue of the fact that the school board now is the one that gets to appoint. And that's a school board that's primarily made up of members from other towns at this point.
So can I ask what without going into a lot of detail, or can you just tell us what your solution would be?
I would put it back. I think it should be put back to the select board.
Okay.
The problem is this isn't just a Clarendon problem. This is going to keep reoccurring
Right.
throughout the state. And just because it's doesn't happen very frequently doesn't mean it shouldn't be corrected. And there, as I pointed out in the write-up that I submitted, that this goes a long way to creating an atmosphere of cooperation and trust. And even though it may seem insignificant to people, and it isn't focusing on the issues of the day, I think it's a very important thing to get right. And because that establishes a tone for everything else that goes on around. And that's important to the people.
Okay. So Ken, maybe you want to weigh in at this point and give us your kind of perspective? And there you go.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity to speak. A couple of clarifications, something Gwen said about the time frame. It was actually the first change to, I'll back up the truck. I think people are getting now that back in 2005, it shifted from select boards to school boards to fill vacancies on their local boards. And so it's been that way for almost 16 years. Now, with the advent of Act 46, more and more districts started becoming unified unions. At the time, back in 05, I saw that part of the law and I said, what does that mean? If a town doesn't operate a school board, the select board does it. It didn't register with me that it was unified unions they were talking about. So what happened is Mill River became a unified union in 2016. We were one of the first in the state after Act 46. It was Rutland Northeast and Mill River were the first two after Act 46. And we realized that that part of the law hadn't gotten changed from select boards to school boards. So that did get changed. We proposed that it didn't say anything about school boards at all in the law at the time about unified unions, applicable to unified unions. So we put forth a proposal from Mill River that the select board would at least consult with the school board. And then we'd cooperate and make an appointment. And that got changed to just the school board fills the appointment along the road to it becoming a bill and a law and all that. And we said, fine, we're good with that. And in most cases, you know, there's not a problem. Select boards, and it shouldn't be a problem. I got an email from the chair of Champlain Island Unified Union yesterday when he saw my piece in Digger and said, we get along well with our select board and this wasn't a problem. They had a vacancy occur during that window last year that Gwen was talking about. Am I saying your name right? Gwen? But
it's Gwen, but you're close enough. It's fine.
Gwen, thank you. Sorry about that. But what happened was the law changed in 2017 under miscellaneous education, which senators, you'll probably remember that happens a lot in legislative session, technical corrections to education law. So that was Act 49 in 2017, and it sunsetted for some reason. We didn't realize it was sunsetting, but it sunsetted in July of 2018. So in 2018, it was refreshed again under an appropriations bill, Act 11. That's what you were talking about. This was the first time it had been refreshed, so to speak. And then last year, it expired because it was last year. What went right in 2020 for anybody, you know? So it expired for a few months from July 1st until October 2nd. And in that time, it went back to select boards to fill the vacancies. Didn't get on anybody's radar screen, I think, or not too many. But it isn't a case, as been said, that I've heard it said that it got slipped in at the last second in last year's legislative session, or it was taken away from the select board, given back, and now it's been taken away again. It's really not all that fuzzy about it. It just expired last year because of the unusual legislative session. So I hope that clarifies things. Senator Collmore, as far as the representation goes on the Mill River Board, it's 4 from Clarendon, 4 from Wallingford, 2 from Shrewsbury and 1 from Timoth. And that is all based on what the census was in 2015 when we were working on the Articles of Agreement. So it was representative of how many people in each town. And another point is this, to this issue of Clarendon doesn't have a say. It should be Clarendon or Wallingford or whomever, whatever select board. It's when we were forming up this unified union, I ran into a lot of citizens. We ran into a lot of citizens that were saying, well, what about our kids? It's our kids. It's our school, Shrewsbury, Clarendon, Timoth, wherever. And I promoted, we need to stop thinking about it as so local. So we're going to hang on to this with both hands. Kind of as far as education is concerned, let's erase the town lines. And it's one district, very similar to Rutland City. One board runs everything pre-K through 12. And kids in Mill River now, Shrewsbury can go to Clarendon, Clarendon can go to Timoth. It's like, it's kind of free moving. And Clarendon does have a say in the matter. There is absolutely no reason this has to be so controversial. We can just work together. The Mill River Board is not going to appoint somebody that Clarendon is going to go, oh my God, or any of the other towns are going to say that. They're looking for somebody who is interested in education issues, watching the bottom line for the taxpayers. And there's no reason that Clarendon and Clarendon Select Board and the Mill River Board can't come to an agreement that everybody can live with. And I'm a classic example. I was actually appointed by the Wallingford Select Board in 1998 to fill a vacancy on the Wallingford Elementary Board. And look how good I turned out, huh? But I would be glad to go on or come back. I hope I answered questions about the makeup. Right now, it's normally an 11-member board. Right now, there is one missing from Clarendon. So the remaining 10 board members will discuss. But as I understand, the chair of the Mill River Board and the chair of the Clarendon Select Board have been in communication, and Mill River is going to be interviewing people. And I've got my fingers crossed that this will just all be fine. But clearly, you wouldn't have a fire department filling a vacancy on a police department. We hear select boards talking about, in 05, I heard it time and time again, balance of power. We need a balance of power. I said, fine, okay, so school boards should fill vacancies on select boards. And they all went, no, that's crazy talk. What are you talking about? We all just need to work together on this. But there is nobody better attuned to what a school member needs to have in their toolbox, so to speak, or whatever, than other school board members. They know education. These school board members, most of them, have been on for the long haul. We've got a pretty good change over this year. The Mill River Board is balanced. And again, we can work this out, but the final authority for school boards should be with the school board, in my opinion.
Okay.
And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks.
Let me ask Robert Congdon if he wants to weigh in, and then we'll get to Todd.
Thank you, senators, for allowing us to join you today. And I am a select board member in the town of Clarendon. Here as an individual, I'm not representing officially the select board in any fashion, but I would contradict what Mr. Fredette just stated in his testimony by simply stating that the people of the town of Clarendon are the ones who know best who should represent them on the school board. So the reality comes down to who is going to pick that replacement, when literally weeks ago on their March ballot, the people of the town of Clarendon elected one of their school board representatives. It was not the school board that elected that person. So when this takes place and we're facing this vacancy now, I have constituents calling me, reaching out to me on Facebook, who are saying our voice is going to be taken away potentially by not having the ability to say and to vote on who they want to represent them. By giving that power to 2 representatives from Shrewsbury, 3 representatives from Wallingford, 1 representative from Timoth, and then there's only 2 other votes left on the board for the appointment, which are from Clarendon, the Clarendon voice is greatly diminished. There's, no matter how you look at it, and we can talk about unity and we can talk about all of those things, which is great. I wholeheartedly agree that we should be unified. I wholeheartedly agree that we should be able to come to that consensus. However, the fact comes down to the people's voice. And in this case, we ultimately have 2 options. We are not permitted to cast we are allowed to suggest, we're allowed to offer dialogue with the Mill River United School Board at this point, but we are not allowed to cast a decision in that process. And that's what the individuals who are reaching out to me in the town of Clarendon are upset about. They very much want it to be in the hands of Clarendon representatives, which in this case is why the select board makes the most sense. And then also our other option. So that's the first option. The second option is the statute currently allows for a special election. And there is, because of the fact that town meeting day just occurred, and we're just coming off of that, there has been significant amounts of talk of holding that special election and giving the Clarendon voters their ultimate voice in that decision-making process. So there's a lot of discussion here. I know there's a lot of viewpoints, but I think it ultimately comes down to who should have this authority. And the individuals that are reaching out to me are saying that it should definitely be Clarendon and Clarendon's representatives that have that authority to make their, the person who represents them. It should not be a diminished voice by having those other board members from other towns ultimately make that decision for us. That is what is not setting well in the town of Clarendon at this point. And again, going out to the big picture, this is not just a Clarendon issue. Virtually every district around us here in central Vermont, if there was a vacancy, would face this very issue. And I think, from my perspective and individuals that I've talked to, even from other towns, I actually had individuals reach out to me from Shrewsbury, which I know is where Todd's from, who said, if this was a vacancy on the board from our town, we would want the say of who replaces that seat. We wouldn't want Clarendon, Wallingford, and Teignmouth deciding who replaces that Shrewsbury seat. We would want it to be our representatives, our home populace, who makes that decision, which is why I think that from my perspective, taking the 30,000 foot view of this, I would say, giving the town the ultimate authority, whether it be going back to the select board or I realize an election at a vacancy is not always a reality. I mean, we're early in this year since the town meeting that it certainly is a possibility right now. But from the 30,000 foot level, it's a responsibility, and it is something that should rest solely with the town, and should go back to the select board members. Thank you for your time.
Forgive my ignorance here, but if somebody can help me remembering this, I'm not on the education committee. I never have been. And so a lot of the details around the mergers and the unified districts and stuff escape me. I don't know a lot of the details around it, but I do know that when we were looking at the merger down here, there were, and I don't remember the number, but say there were 3 representatives from Putney and 3 from Dummerston, 3 from Guilford, and 5 from Brattleboro. But the Putney representatives, that's my town, that's why I use that. The Putney representatives were voted on by the entire district. They weren't just voted on by, that was the original proposal. And I don't know if that is the case now, or if that's district by district, that it's that way, but it was a general election in the district to vote on the representatives from Putney. And I don't know if that's general, the way it happens generally, or if that's up to the district itself, how they did that, or if that was something that didn't fly anyway. Does anybody know here what I'm talking about? And if, yeah. Ken?
Yeah, I'm not sure about your particular situation, Senator, but the situations I'm familiar with is currently the Unified Unions, Wallingford votes on Wallingford reps, Clarendon votes on Clarendon reps.
Okay.
There are situations that, again, I'm not familiar with, and I don't know if that's your situation down south there, that they have at-large members. So the entire district votes for all the board members. But that that causes me some pause, because they could really, the larger towns could really just load the school board and the little towns would be left out. That's not the case that we have here.
Okay,
I
that
hope
clarifies. Yeah, that clarifies that for me. And I don't know how it ended up here, but that was an issue that I was concerned about also when they were first proposing the bylaws or the charter or whatever it was called. But okay, thank you.
Todd, go ahead. Please.
Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my 2.5 cents worth, folks. My name is Todd Fillmore. I'm a resident of Shrewsbury, and I've been kind of deeply involved in certain issues and aspects of school board activities over the past 9 or 10 months in the Mill River District. So I've been kind of watching a lot of things unfold. I think Mr. Fredette kind of actually lays out the real crux of the issue when he said that, you know, in his view, he'd like to erase town lines. And that's exactly what is at stake here. And that concept, although it may seem appealing, is a flagrant violation of the Vermont Constitution. And I think in all the deliberations regarding Act 46 and so forth, some certain basic foundational laws and rights that flow from our Vermont Constitution have been left in the lurch. I mean, if you look at the Constitution, it opens with a declaration of the rights of the inhabitants of the state of Vermont. So these are rights. And it clarifies that these are unalienable rights. These rights can only be set aside by specific legislative action. When you go down to our Chapter 1, Article 8, we find a very clear depiction of how those rights play out in electoral process, that all elections ought to be free and without corruption, and that all voters having a sufficient, evident, common interest with and attachment to the community have a right to elect officers and be elected into office agreeably to the regulations made in this Constitution. So there is a constitutional connection built right in that gives all community voters the right to elect their officers of their choosing. No matter how we look at this present circumstance, if we allow 7 board members from neighboring towns to pick and choose the representatives for the town of Clarendon, we are bypassing, if not actively suppressing, that core constitutional right. So, you know, I'm not sure how this all unfolded, but to my mind, this is very, very simple. If at all possible, the electorate of any given town should retain the right, in as much as possible, to select a replacement, temporary or otherwise, when a vacancy occurs. So, I mean, simple solutions that come to mind would be, if we're going to allow the school board to appoint this member, then by rights, it should only be limited, the voting should only be limited to those school board members from the affected town, in this case, Clarendon. To allow Wallingford or even Shrewsbury, I would not want to see my own school board representatives having authority over replacement for Clarendon. It's just plain wrong on its face. I think that this piece of legislation should really be kicked back and looked at through the clear lens of the Constitution. This really belongs in the wheelhouse of the voters. And since the voters can't spin on a dime in this case, because we've got to fill this vacancy fairly quickly, the next best thing is, of course, the select board, who were elected by the very same electoral body. So to my mind, it's a pretty straightforward problem and a straightforward solution. Now, whether or not we can get the select board and the school board to cooperate on this, that's a different matter. And if I may, I'd like to open up a little bit of a can of worms that kind of complicates the present situation. The Mill River Select Board, or excuse me, Mill River School Board has been involved in some very controversial political issues that have really caused a lot of division in all 4 towns. And that is still playing out even after the most recent March elections. In fact, we currently have a school board chair who is currently involved in an informal hearing regarding alleged misconduct. All of this stuff is going to be dragged into the school board decision to initiate a replacement. So I think it's fair to say that it's not likely that we're going to see a nice, clean process if the school board is allowed full authority over this situation, as is shown in statute currently. So what the legislature can do about that, I don't know. I mean, I'm just a person who reads the law, tries to pay attention to current events and local issues. I would leave that in your ball court, I suppose. But I think the Constitution is clear on this, folks, with all due respect.
So the person that stepped down, when did that term expire? And why is the need felt that we need to do this quickly to get a replacement?
That's a good question, Senator Collimore. To my recollection, I think George Ambrose's position ends next year. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. So I'm not sure. Maybe Ken knows. Go ahead, Robert.
Town meeting 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. So there's one more year left on this term. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not here to judge exactly how things played out and why they played out the way they did. But Mr. Ambrose resigned the day after town meeting day, which is, I think, what inflamed the Clarendon the Clarendon citizens a little bit even more when the word got out was that, wait a minute, we just had an election. If this was coming down the pike, why didn't it happen, all of 2 months before, so that they could have had their voice? And I think that is, whether or not it's true or not, I'm not here making accusations, and I don't believe it's true. It gives that visual picture of, it adds to the controversy. And I'm not here to talk about the controversies. I think the school board controversies are something totally separate that need to be left out of this
jacket
conversation.
pocket. Oh, it's on the dash.
I firmly believe that this really, again, comes back, like I finished just a few minutes ago, this comes back to more of a representation issue and who gets the say in that representation. The controversies are a side issue in my mind. That should not be the focus of this type of discussion. This discussion really centers around who is the representation that deserves this say. That's where I would leave it.
Okay. Do any of the other committee members have questions? I didn't mean to dominate the discussion here, but Senator Rahm or Senator Polina? Well, okay. Ken, I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I knew somebody was going to catch me on that erasing the town lines thing, Todd, but to be expected, and rightly so. And I never finished that thought. So I will now. What I was saying to these people is, as far as education goes, as far as the kids go, let's erase the town lines. We're all one big district. It's not Shrewsbury kids. It's not Clarendon kids. It's not Wallingford, Timoth. It's Mill River kids. And they can move about our district, go to different schools without restrictions now under this governance structure. I did not in any way, shape, or form mean to actually erase town lines and blur everything together. I was talking about opportunities for the kids and to think Mill River instead of the individual towns. Back to what Robbie was just saying, I know George Ambrose quite well, and I've known him for years. And I called him up and said, George, you did it after town meeting. People are going to say you did that on purpose. He said, well, yeah, probably. He said, but he actually had very noble reasons for waiting until he did, to just make sure the budget got passed, make sure the dust had settled. We've had a lot of divisiveness in this election year. And George is a good man. He did not have anything nefarious planned here. And also about the Constitution, education is the only public service mentioned in the Vermont Constitution. There's nothing about plowing roads. There's nothing about any municipal services at all. The only thing is we'll keep an appropriate number of schools for educating our kids. And again, I come back to who knows better about that than school boards. I could relate some horror stories. Hopefully, in most places in the state, select boards and school boards would get along fine. And this would not be a problem.
We lost you.
Oh, I flipped my microphone up, duh. I'm not a real good Zoom guy either, so bear with me. I've done it a few times, but now I lost where I was.
Well, that's okay.
There are horror stories from '05 and beyond that I heard from all over the state in '05 that was like, it's just a battle. And it doesn't need to be that way. So, as I understood at the beginning of this particular situation, somebody had previously written to the Clarendon Select Board to express an interest if a vacancy came up. That was back in January. This person wrote a letter. And I believe it was being considered. I could be wrong about this, but I was talking to the Clarendon Select Board chair. He says, we already have a person interest. We can just appoint them. But then they found out they don't have that authority. So that's a little bit spooky to me. How we handle it on a school board, how I always handled it, and how Mill River is handling it. It's put it out there to the public. Let people come in. They be interviewed. It's all thoughtful. The select board can be involved in this. There's no reason for this to be adversarial. But to just rubber stamp somebody because they sent a letter prior to the vacancy even occurring is a little, that concept's a little troubling to me. So thank you.
Okay.
So as a select board member, I feel that I need to respond to that accusation because we have very specific guidelines that are laid out as to how appointments take place. And that position would have absolutely been posted for a minimum of 14 days, and there would have been a very specific process. So any accusations being made that are making it sound like there's something nefarious going on are totally unfounded.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I misunderstood what Mike had said, I guess. It was a phone conversation. And another piece of legislation I'm supporting these days is the hearing aids bill. So I appreciate you clarifying that, Robert. I should have known better.
Todd?
Yeah, very briefly. If the roles were reversed in that if the school board was given advisory capacity, but the final decision rested with the select board, I don't think we'd be having this discussion right now. But that's not the case. The law has those two roles reversed. So the Clarendon Select Board or any other town select board in a similar situation only has advisory capacity. In the end, statutory authority is fully given to the school boards. Therein lies the problem. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. I see we've been joined by Senator Clarkson, who unfortunately has missed most of the discussion here, but we'll be glad to fill her in. Madam Chair, I'm going to cede the meeting back to you.
Well, I think that, I have mixed feelings about this because I do think that school boards are in a position to know what they need on the school board. However, the representatives are from a particular town, and whether or not the residents of that town are electing the right people. I mean, if you had the school board picking the people, they might not pick the same people that are elected by the town, and whether that's a good thing or not, it is the town's people that are responsible for sending that person. And I appreciated, Todd, your suggestion about having the other members on the school board from that town do it, but that is fraught also with problems because you might have three people on that school board that have a very, very different orientation than the person who left. And the person who left was voted in presumably because of their particular stance. So now you have the potential for losing that. And it would be also very hard if it was the person from Teignmouth who resigned, because there is nobody else from Teignmouth to do that. So I think that what we need to do here, committee, I don't think we're going to solve this today. But I think what we need to do is we need to hear a little bit from our attorneys, from Tucker Anderson, and who is our kind of our municipal attorney. He deals with municipal issues, and perhaps Jim Damaris, just have him. He's the attorney for the education committee, so he deals with a lot of the education issues, and just have a conversation with them about this. And does that make sense, committee? Because we need to be able to do it in a way that's fair to people, that gives the townspeople the person they want. But we also need to look at what the law is and why it was done that way. And if we're going to change, what changes might need to be made. And I don't think we're in a position to do any of that today. Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't think anybody that came to our discussion today ever thought we were going to find that magic wand and just wave it and say, okay, it's all fixed, let's go home. Because the other thing we have to do, we can't just fix the problem for the Mill River Union School District. We have to fix the problem statewide, because as everybody pretty much has pointed out, this isn't going to just be a one-time thing. Other people will come off school boards in the future, and we need to have something in place. It's unfortunate that we let it sunset, and I had no idea about it until this issue came up with this particular situation. So I really appreciate everybody taking their time out. I know, that it's in the middle of the afternoon on a work day and you gave up some time, but I really think you clarified the issue for us pretty well. We know what we have to decide. And I know if we decide one way, there's going to be people, just like everything else we do. If we vote yes on a law, there's people that wish we didn't, and we have the other way. So I agree with the chair. We'll have to take further testimony on this. And but I thank you all for coming here today. And if any of the other committee members want to weigh in, or Gwen again, that's fine.
I am just going to say that before I go to Senator Polina, that we will keep you on the list for invites for when we do this, when this comes up again, so that you can attend or just watch, but feel free to join us the next time we take this up. Senator Polina, did you have a?
Well, I don't have any particular wisdom to share. I just was going to agree that we really need to think this through a bit more. And my bottom line is to do what we can to make sure that the local voices are heard in this process, make sure that local people are well represented in the decision making. I'm not really sure how best to do that at this point. I mean, I've heard good arguments on both sides of multiple sides of the issue actually this afternoon. So I think we do need to just let it sink in and talk more with our attorneys and get more background on what it is we're delving into.
Mm-hmm. Because, and we're the municipal committee,
Right.
but we're not the education committee. And so we need to have a better understanding of that. And I will also talk to Senator Campion, who's the chair of education, just to see if they want to weigh in with us also. Senator Clarkson?
I apologize. I'm sorry to have missed what sounds like a pretty interesting conversation. I was in Senate Appropriations for far too long. So I apologize. I'd rather have been here.
We will keep you informed and up to date.
Thanks.
Gwen?
Just a recommendation to have the School Boards Association.
I was just going to say that, yeah. We should have the School Boards Association also join us. So we will try to, I don't think we will take this up next week, although I know you want an answer pretty soon, but even if we made legislative changes, it wouldn't satisfy your need to have this done quickly, because if it's a legislative change that needs to happen, it would have to pass out of this committee, then it would have to pass the Senate, then it would have to go to the House, then it would have to pass the House, and then the governor would have to sign it. So you need to figure out how you're going to get this person appointed pronto, without any help from us.
If I may, Senator, I'm familiar with that process that you just described, but the Mill River Board is planning on filling the vacancy on, I believe, April 7th at their first meeting in April. The statute says within 30 days of the creation of the vacancy, which was March 12th when George made his resignation effective. So you're right that you can't get any legislation passed in time for all that, but Clarendon does have the right to call for a special election. That would probably almost have to be after the vacancy was filled by the Mill River Board. They could call for a special election if they wanted to, if they weren't happy with Mill River. But again, I hope it doesn't come down to that. I hope it all just is, we come to an amicable, a candidate who everybody can live with.
I would suggest at this point that the Mill River Board give deference, give a lot of deference, not necessarily let them make the decision, but to the Clarendon Select Board, and really try to work with them so that they feel that they have had the residents of Clarendon have had their voice heard. And I don't think that should be that difficult. You get 3 members from the board and the 3 members from the Select Board to sit down and talk about it and figure out where you're going to go.
I would support that as well. Let Clarendon people decide for Clarendon right now until we can.
Really give deference to that process this time, even though, and then we'll look at it more and see what, because unfortunately, what will happen is if the Clarendon people really feel like they haven't been heard at all, it's going to add to the tension and the non-cooperation, I think. And you don't want that. So, all right. Any other questions from the committee? Comments?
Thank you all.
No, thank you all
Enjoy the
for coming.
weekend. It's supposed to be very nice.
Thank you. Thanks.